The courtroom was still, heavy with anticipation. Cameras rolled quietly from the back, reporters scribbled feverishly, and the defendant stood at the defense table, face taut, fingers intertwined as if holding his composure together with sheer will. For weeks, the defense had carefully constructed a narrative of innocence. Miscommunication, delegation, reliance on trusted advisors. These were the pillars of their story. But everything changed the moment the government introduced the recording. It wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was months of conversation, preserved, documented, undeniable. The defendant's own words, captured in detail, confirmed what the prosecution had been trying to prove all along: awareness, intent, and deliberate deception. The defense team reacted immediately, requesting a sidebar, motioning for delay, trying to frame objections around admissibility and relevance, but the judge had seen it all before. After a brief review, the recording was deemed admissible and it would be played in court. The first notes of the recording echoed through the speakers. Jurors leaned forward instinctively. It was not interpretive testimony, not expert analysis. It was raw, unfiltered reality. The defendant's voice, calm on the recording, described instructions that directly contradicted the narrative of ignorance and delegation his attorneys had built. Details were clear: specific numbers, misrepresented documents, instructions to subordinates. No room for misunderstanding, no ambiguity. The evidence was a direct window into intent. From the defense table, the reaction was instantaneous. The defendant's composed mask shattered. Eyes widened, lips parted in a silent gasp, shoulders tense. Hands gripped the edge of the table as if the surface itself could stabilize his faltering control. It was the first visible sign that months of planning and narrative construction could not withstand the weight of recorded truth. Observers in the courtroom felt the shift immediately. What had been an abstract legal battle transformed into a visceral human moment. Panic, fear, and disbelief radiated from the defendant. It was not theatrical, it was the physical manifestation of someone confronting irreversible accountability. The jury, meanwhile, was forced to reassess everything they had heard. For weeks, they had been presented with the defense's carefully curated story. The defendant was unaware, reliant on others, distanced from wrongdoing. But now, the recording eliminated all doubt. Every claim, every argument of delegation or ignorance was contradicted by his own words. The prosecution did not rush. They allowed the jury to absorb the details, to hear the pattern of instructions, the knowledge, the deliberation. By the time the recording ended, the narrative of innocence had collapsed entirely. The defendant's loss of control mirrored the evidence itself, a tangible confirmation of guilt. At that point, the judge allowed a brief recess. Counsel conferred quietly, strategizing for the next steps. But the moment had already left an indelible mark. The courtroom air was heavy with tension. Reporters murmured, cameras focused, and jurors reflected silently. The defendant returned to his seat, visibly shaken, pale, hands shaking slightly, a stark contrast to the calm confidence he had displayed at the start of the trial. Analysts later noted that recorded evidence like this is rare but devastating. It bypasses inference, speculation, and interpretation. Instead, it presents the defendant's choices in real time, with clarity, context, and weight. Federal courts treat such admissions with particular seriousness because they collapse complex elements of an offense into a single, irrefutable exhibit. The implications extended far beyond the moment of panic. Sentencing calculations would now reflect the deliberate nature of the offense. Federal judges consider scope, intent, and harm when determining punishment, and evidence of deliberate planning and knowledge heavily influences guidelines and discretionary decisions. Any possibility of leniency based on ignorance or delegation evaporated the moment the recording played. For the defense, procedural options were constrained. Calling the defendant to testify could invite further scrutiny, cross-examination anchored to the recording, and heightened exposure. Remaining silent risked leaving the jury with unchallenged evidence of intent. Each path was fraught, each choice amplifying the consequences of the recorded truth. Outside the procedural mechanics, the human element was striking. Courtroom observers witnessed a rare combination of panic, disbelief, and tangible realization. Even the most experienced trial attendees recognized the significance. When a defendant confronts unambiguous evidence of their own wrongdoing, the psychological impact can be immediate and overwhelming. The broader significance of this case lies in its message. Sophistication, power, or status does not insulate anyone from accountability. Federal courts operate on evidence, procedure, and rule of law. Intent, when clearly documented and demonstrable, cannot be mitigated by narrative alone. The jury, the judge, and the legal system collectively reinforce this principle in real time. As the day progressed, reporters continued documenting, legal analysts dissected strategy, and the courtroom moved toward the final phases of deliberation. Sentencing would soon follow, but the moment of the recording had already crystallized the trajectory. There was no ambiguity left. Knowledge and intent had been established. This case is also a lesson in legal strategy. Sequencing of evidence, timing, and presentation matter immensely. By introducing the recording after the defense had committed to a narrative of ignorance, the prosecution amplified its impact. Jurors were forced to reevaluate all prior testimony, documents, and statements, now viewed through the lens of direct admission. In many ways, the defendant's visible loss of control was a reflection of procedural reality. The law is unyielding when confronted with undeniable evidence. Panic, emotion, and human reaction do not alter the record, but they serve as a stark reminder of what is at stake. For the defendant, the confrontation with truth is not theoretical. It is immediate, visceral, and irreversible. Ultimately, the recording did more than confirm guilt. It forced recognition of accountability, highlighted the procedural integrity of federal courts, and emphasized the seriousness with which deliberate misconduct is treated. The jury's decision, once rendered, would reflect not speculation, not conjecture, but clear, demonstrable actions captured in sound, preserved for analysis, and presented without interpretation. Even as the defendant was escorted from the courtroom, shaken but composed as protocol demanded, the significance of the recording lingered. It was a moment that defined the trial, clarified the stakes, and demonstrated how direct evidence can pivot an entire legal proceeding. It was more than just a moment of panic. It was the culmination of months of investigation, legal strategy, and undeniable documentation. For viewers, analysts, and the public, the lesson is clear. In federal court, recordings speak louder than narrative. Intent, once captured and verified, is practically irrefutable. And for those who believe sophistication, influence, or delegation can shield them, the reality of consequences remains stark and uncompromising.